Hi guys, Neto here, and today I have a special announcement for you. I'm here to present you with a little bit of what is coming in over the next month. We've been working on this project for some months now, and finally it's time to share the news.
Hello, kinsfolk. Are you into awesome miniatures for 3D printing? So I have an announcement for you. I come from Claygod, a land of Viking fantasy. Studios has handcrafted my whole world from scratch with more than 75 miniatures, 3 different tribes, and a lot of surprises. My name is lost to time now, but there are those that call me Headsplitter. The ones that walk beside me in my journey to Valhalla. This amazing new product will be shown in a 3-video series in the second week of August. Subscribe below to receive an email with a link so you won't miss it. Oh, and there is more. If you subscribe right now, you'll receive the 3D printing files of my miniature for free as a sample. You won't regret it. This offer won't last much longer, so don't forget to subscribe. SKÅL in the name of Odin!
Yes, we've done it! Lut has just created Journey to Valhalla, a universe of Viking fantasy with 3 different tribes that will be shown in our launch week that will start on August 9th. And this is the Headsplitter, our Viking that is now available for free in the link in the description. If you are into this team, just click right below to download him and also to receive more information on the project. I will give you a couple seconds, okay? Yes, now that you've done it, it's time to print and paint this badass ancient warrior following the steps of this painting tutorial.
Hi everyone, my name is Achala Kawaguchi and today we're going to paint the Headsplitter. This is their miniature we're going to paint. This is an amazing sculpture with a lot of details, especially on his shield, and very subtle details like the wrinkles on his clothes. So I hope you enjoy this tutorial. And let's begin! Today we're going to paint the Headsplitter. This miniature has the opportunity for us to try some non-metallic metals with battle damage and a lot of texture for his clothes. So let's begin by applying a layer of black primer on the miniature. I prefer to use airbrush to go faster, but you can also do it by applying with a brush. If you're going to use an airbrush like me, just remember to use multiple thin layers. And after letting it dry for a bit, at least an hour to be sure, this should be the result. Next, using an airbrush with white paint, I'm going to spray the paint from above. This is called zenithal highlight. You can also get a similar effect by using a dry brush, but if you want a softer look, the airbrush will be the tool. This step is very good to create some pre-shading, and this is very helpful as a guide. Although this technique is very useful as a guide, I'm also using because it's easier for the lens to focus. So here what I'm doing is enhancing the pre-shading. I'm using white and I'm going in a very fine details of his face to manually highlight some important areas. This step is completely optional and you can do it later on when you're going with the right color of his skin. But the main reason I'm doing this is because he has a lot of wrinkles on his face and I make sure I'm not losing it. More or less like a note or a comment or a footnote, but on a miniature. I'm also highlighting his hair. At this point I wasn't sure about the color, more on that later, but the main idea here is to define all the volumes of his head, or at least make them more visible. Now I'm doing the exact opposite. I'm going to enhance the shadows. I'm using a mixture of black and a little bit of dark blue. Really, at this point, any color will do. You can also use purple if you want, or you can use a greenish tone. Doesn't matter. It just needs to be a very dark color. And I'm doing this because the miniature tends to lose the dark tones when you're going for the zenithal highlight. And the shadows are very important for the contrast. So here I'm manually enhancing them. Okay, so now let's start laying some colors. I'm using turquoise from Fantasy Game, which is from scale 75. The code for this specific color is SFG31. I'm diluting about 1:1 with water and applying a translucent layer. You can see the shadows are preserved. Here I'm using a violet code SFG27 from Fantasy Games from scale 75, and I'm painting the shadows. You can see it's easy to apply the shadows here because they are very well preserved. I'm saying the paint code because the names are so weird that will be hard for me to pronounce. And also you can see I'm not painting only over the pre-established shadows. I'm increasing a bit the area, and by doing that I'll have 2 tones of shadows. Now I'm going to use a blue called SFG30 from scale 75. This tone is slightly different from the turquoise, and I'll apply it as a mid-tone in some areas, mainly to soften some transitions. I'm applying it a bit more diluted, more or less 2 parts water, 1 part paint. We have to pay attention on this miniature because it has a lot of wrinkles on the clothes, and we don't want to lose those details. Now I'm using a 50-50 mix with Hero Blue SFG33 and Jade SFG28. The idea is to create the transition to the lighter colors. And I'm using this greenish tone because if you imagine the sunlight, which is a bit yellowish, we will start to get some slightly greenish tones because blue plus yellow, it's green. Now I'm using the Hero Blue code SFG33. I'm using it pure. Now I'm mixing Hero Blue from scale 75 with Ivory from AK Interactive. I'm applying over very small areas that will be our highlights. Now for the paints, I'm using a mix of Holdra Blue SFG26 and Jade SFG28, both from scale 75. Now using Aryan Hot Blue SFG29, I'm applying a light glaze. Don't forget the glaze consistency should be very diluted. Now I'm back with Amarith Blue SFG30. Here we want to avoid the recess. Now I'm using Hiryu Blue and I'm trying to apply it over a smaller area than the previous layer. The shoulder pads are too blue, so I'm going to glaze over with Orphan Jade SFG28. For the shield, I'm applying Burnt Sienna ink from Liquitex. In the upper part of the shield, I'm applying Raw Sienna, which is a yellowish tone. Each new layer you apply, the color will get darker. Here I'm applying a layer of burnt sienna, and I already applied to some other areas. So this is what we have so far. I applied a few layers of the inks, concentrating more on the shadows to get it darker. I have all of the latter parts painted. At this point, we have half of the work done for this miniature. Now I'm using Wine Red from AK Interactive, and the idea here is to enhance the shadows. I'm basically painting over the shadows we did with the pre-shading. Now I'm using Basic Skin from AK Interactive. Here we are aiming for the mid-tones. And here with this color we need to avoid the highlights. We need to leave some parts white. Here I'm mixing basic skin tone with ivory, both from AK Interactive. Here we're aiming for the highlights. Now I'm applying black ink using a very fine brush. The idea here is to darken the recesses. Now I'm going to apply a dark purple glaze using dioxanite purple from Liquitex. Just so you know, the consistency of the glaze should be something like this. At this point I'm using the tones we previously used for his skin to fix some areas and to soften some transitions. This is the kind of refinement that brings your miniature to the next level. Now I'm applying a glaze using red. Any red will do, I'm using a cheap Brazilian craft paint. Now I'm using wine red from AK Interactive. The idea here is to glaze over some shadows to create some tonal variation. Here I'm using a mix of burnt umber and black, both from Liquitex, to darken some shadows. I'll apply it over the leather parts and the wood on the shield. Now I'm using a mix of 50/50 Huldra Blue SFG26 and Orphan Jade SFG28, both from scale 75. The idea here is to give a hint of green reflecting on the boots. I'll use this green on the blades as well, and I'm planning to use a bit on the shield. Now I'm using Huldra Blue SFG26 to enhance some shadows. And at this point of the miniature that I decided I would go with white hair and beard for him, because on my initial drafts I was planning red hair. And now I'm taking this opportunity to say that it's always a good idea to plan your color scheme ahead. In my case, I take a picture of the miniature with black primer with some zenithal highlights and I paint over using Photoshop. It doesn't need to be anything very elaborated or anything like that. You just need to visualize how the color scheme will look like and how the colors are distributed in the composition. And you can use this as a guide, but as you can see, you can change your mind along the way. Now using pure white, I'm going to bring back some highlights. Very important to use the side of the brush whenever you can, because it will avoid you to go into the recess. Now using Somber Gray from Vallejo Game Color, we're going to work on the non-metallic metals of the shield. We can use a lot of stuff that's already there, like some shadows that were there because of the pre-shading, and the same for some highlights. Here I'm going with the middle tone to create some gradients along the border of the shield. You see, this part on the middle is almost done for us. We just need to adjust a few transitions. Now I'm using some Aryan Hot Blue SFG29 mixed with black to create some shades on the non-metallic metal. Here I'm using pure Aryan Hot Blue. The idea is to create some abstract shapes to simulate that something is reflecting on his helmet. I'm also applying some light gray tones, mixing black with white. And same goes for the shield. I'm going through different mixes of grayish tones, mixing sometimes blue in the middle and creating some transitions. And the same thing for the axe. Now I'm using pure white to add some extreme highlights. Here I'm using Amarth Blue SFG 30. Here I'm applying some burnt umber using the airbrush. I'm lightly glazing over. This means I'm applying very light coats. But since this paint is very translucent, it's very easy to apply and you will only mess up if you apply too much coats in the same place. For the dragon on his belt, we're going for a non-metallic gold, so we need to make the material looks different than the leather, despite being almost the same color. To help us with that, we need to increase the contrast to make it look like a metal. Next, we can use more yellowish tones, so the viewer can tell it apart easily. What I'm doing is use ivory from AK Interactive to increase the highlights. It's almost white, but it's a yellowish white. For those who don't know, we used to call these colors off-whites. Now I'm using Sahara Yellow from SKÅL 75. Now I'm using Gobi Brown from SKÅL 75. Now I'm using Dubai Brown, also from SKÅL 75. And now I'm applying Eclipse Gray Now what we need to do is edge highlight this entire dragon. It's a bit fiddly, but it makes a big difference. To paint the eyes, I like to use white paint over a black color, so the white will turn to a gray. Now I'm using black paint and a very fine brush to draw the pupil. Now for the details on the shield, what I'm doing here is using black paint and applying to the recess, and with white later I'm going for the edge highlights of the dragons. It's a bit fiddly to do this, I'll not lie, but this is a very important part of the miniature and I think it's worth spending this much time. This will make the details pop. Now I'm going to apply the rust effect from Green Stuff World. This is basically an orange wash that dries very matte. This is not an oil-based wash, so it dries quickly. The idea here is to apply to some random areas to create a more beaten effect for the shield. With a dry and clean brush, I'm sort of cleaning the excess. To not complete wipe everything, we'll leave a bit behind and that's what we want. For this effect you can also use powder pigments or even oil washes. And here is the final result. The only part not covered in this tutorial is the base, but I kept it simple. I just imagine a subtle light coming from the front and a greenish one coming from the back. The same ones we already used on the miniature, just extended to the base. And speaking of the base, you can go even further by adding some grass tufts or use a completely different base and go even crazier. The focal point of a miniature can change depending on the angle you are looking. From the back, this miniature has the shield as the focal point, and from the front, it's the character's face. So it's important to give a special attention to those areas when painting this miniature. The main thing I changed from my original concept is giving him grey hair, showing he's a seasoned warrior. Not that I think that a red head would be bad, but I think by using grey hair I gave him the vibe of a boss. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and see you in the next one. Abração e até mais!